Good morning, everybody. Welcome to my carnivore experiment Q&A this morning. This is like the third week already of my keto carnivore experiment. I've been documenting it here on my Facebook page and also especially on Instagram, where I've been sharing pretty much not all my meals, but a lot of the food that I've been preparing, cooking, shopping. And yes, it's a lot easier and more simplified when you go carnivore because there is not a lot of ingredients available except, for meat. And so I've been sharing throughout these 3 weeks kind of my evolution into carnivore and how I started by going from my normal keto paleo way of eating into like increasing my protein, my meat consumption. So just a quick recap of the experiment. So week 1, I did what I call the 80-20 kind of experiment, where I was 80% carnivore, 20% keto. So that meant that I was still eating my greens and I was eating about just kind of like a 30% protein and 60% fat and 10% carbohydrates diet. And those 10% of carbs in my case was like mostly dark leafy greens and some fermented foods. I eat sauerkraut and kimchi mostly. And then you guys know, if you follow me on Instagram or on this page, that, good morning, Kat. That I'm eating a lot of like bitter greens, like big salads, and the occasional avocado sprinkled in it. We can talk more about food if you guys are interested in hearing more details on my food, but I have some questions from readers and watchers that posted across the different platforms. Some come from YouTube, some come from Instagram, and a couple from here. And I wrote them down and I wanted to reply to them. But before we go into the questions, and there goes my light. Welcome to live video. This is my little cute light and it's dead. No more light. Okay, so before we get into the questions, I would like to make, first of all, a clarification about this carnivore diet. So there are a lot of people out there that think that a carnivore diet will be a very high protein diet, meaning mainly protein, and that is not ketogenic. So that is the first mistake, because unless we're eating only lean, very lean meat, then the carnivore diet is actually moderate protein and high fat, just like keto. So when we're talking here, and I got some data, especially from one of the first people, the original fathers of this carnivore experiment, that is, I can't pronounce his first name, William Stevenson, the explorer, and he was the one that got tested after he came back from the Arctic and being with the Inuit. He was actually tested in a clinical setting in New York. My English is terrible this morning, I'm sorry. Bear with me, please, we'll get the data out. So for 1 year in a very strict clinical setting, he was tested for a carnivore-only diet. And there were 2 people, him and his friend, who partook of the experiment. And at some point, the experiment was split in 2 to where one was kept on a high-fat meat diet. So this like ratio of like about 70% fat, 30% protein, which is the true carnivore diet, while the other one was put on just lean protein. And quite interesting how they reacted differently, and how the one that was kept on the higher fat kept feeling great, having no problem, good energy. We'll get to all your questions. Please keep posting them. I will get to them once we finish the premise. Okay, guys, thank you for watching. So while the person put on very lean protein started losing energy and feeling sick quite fast, and just having like all kinds of different symptoms like dehydration, and he got intense diarrhea for a few days, and that's just on lean protein. So quite different experiment. And now we are reminded that a true carnivore diet, like done kind of in an ancestral sense, it is a high-fat diet. And so it's not too far from our ketogenic way of living, especially keto paleo, but it depends really, like, you know, on the keto that you are doing. Some people are doing keto with like 22-23% protein. This is a 30% protein ratio should be. So there is a little bit of a difference. And of course, the carbs go from 5-10% to about 0. I think there are still a little bit of carbohydrates, but very, very, very limited. Okay. So this has been 3 weeks coming from about 5% carbohydrates in my diet as leafy greens and some avocado to the week number 2 where I went strict meat and water for 6 days before the weekend hit. And I know that 6 days is not, sorry, it's not a long time to do strictly meat and water, but I honestly think that I was pretty adapted, and like my body is pretty adapted to high protein because I've always done a high protein version of keto, and I always kind of, you know, did really well on red meat. And there was a question here about the O blood type, and we'll talk about it in a second. But so after a week, what happened is that the weekend hit, I had to leave the house and go to Los Angeles. And so it was really hard for me to be able to continue this. So I decided to give a break to the experiment and continue the experiment, but in a different way. So I introduced back greens. I actually, the first night I ate a giant bowl of kimchi, and I will also tell you why. Because after a week on carnivore, on meat, 6 days on meat and water, after about 3 days my bowel stopped working completely. So it went from working normally, daily bowel movement, into like complete constipation. And this is a big point for me about why we're going to do this carnivore diet or not, or how we modify it for your individual gut flora. We'll talk about it in a second. So I had a giant bowl of kimchi that on Friday night, and sure enough, the next day I was going to the bathroom back to normal and feeling pretty good. But the next day, as I was running around, running errands at a conference, it was very difficult for me to keep, again, strict carnivore. So I was able to find some fish and some meat that was probably cooked with spices and other things, and I ended up eating a little side of guacamole. And then on Sunday, which was 2 days ago, I kind of went back to keto paleo, and on Sunday I just ate kind of normal keto paleo. And quite interesting, Monday, yesterday, I felt like I was getting a really bad migraine. So I am not sure how this is related because this is too short of an experiment, but these are all factors that I want to consider when I, you know, for me, this is like clinical practice. I'm applying this knowledge, all my knowledge, and just seeing how my body reacts, because I want to be able to know when my patients, my clients come to me with questions. I want to be able to know what's going on and, you know, kind of combine everything that I learned from nutrition with some practice, and not just on my clients, but for myself as well. Because if you think about it, you guys, quick side note, how do we know that everything we learn is right? You know, it's just in a book, and there is some research done on rats, maybe humans if you're lucky. How do we really know? You know, for me, I'm a strong believer of trying things on for size myself, and then collaborating with my clients in trying it on for them, and then like just kind of reflecting and thinking, not just like blindly doing these experiments. So let's go back to the questions now. Now that I made this long introduction, so let's go back to questions. Let's talk quickly. Well, what led me to do this, Ronnie asked. What led me to do this actually is, it's been in my radar for a while. I was never really attracted to carnivore only strict meat and water, because I think that I don't know. I really don't think it's a necessary way of life, but again, for some people, it might work, and it'd be interesting to hear if any of you who are watching or will watch later, if you have been just strict meat and water for a long period of time, what were your motivations? And why would you want to embark in such a lifestyle? And what was the originating point? Was it to simplify your life? Was it to address gut issues? Was it to address any health issues that you were having? Because, of course, there are many different ways to address the health issues. Some people go vegan. So it'd be really interesting to know what the motivations are to go carnivore. And there are some carnivore groups on Facebook. So this is a good question I could be asking in the near future to see what other people wanted, why they wanted to do it. And for me, one of my patients went carnivore, and it kind of threw me into a bit of panic because I cannot really recommend things that I have not done. So as I mentioned in other videos before, I jumped in with her to see and try to accompany her the best possible way. Yes, perimenopausal, we'll talk about that, absolutely talk about that in a second. So the macros, let's talk about macros real quick. So the macros I would put, it depends. I cannot tell you exactly on your calories because depending on what your calories are, like your daily calorie need. But what I would put in is 30% protein, 70% fat. And like make sure, this is if you're going strict carnivore, that would be the ideal ratio in my opinion. And I was, present as a couple of lectures quite recently, and one with Dr. Ten Neiman, and he was talking about an ancestral protein fat ratio, and that is a 30% protein. And once we reach that protein threshold, a lot of things kind of change in our physiology. So I have not tried this long term, but I am trying to keep the high protein ratio. As this week I went back to eating keto paleo, so I brought back my greens because, like I say, my gut was completely stopped. And so I am trying to do back my modified version of carnivore with like about 3 to 5% carbs in the form of leafy greens and fermented vegetables. And this week I bought sauerkraut, and I'm fermenting some zucchini to see if I manage to do it, some lacto fermentation. So as far as hormones, one question right here is about perimenopause. So I am also perimenopausal, and one thing that I've noticed, and this is just from 3 weeks, is that my cycle would normally come on the full moon. I was pretty clockwork aligned with like within the first 2 days of the full moon, like that means 1 or 2 days before the full moon, I would usually start menstruating. And funny enough, even though my cycle is now very spotty, and like I have about every couple of months a period, but after not having a period for about 3 months, now with the full moon coming, and I started actually spotting after being carnivore. So I feel like the extra protein, and especially there is something to be said about tyrosine, because somebody asked me about hypothyroidism and this protein diet, high protein diet, and my client is doing the carnivore experiment with me, is a hypothyroid patient, been on medication for about 12-13 years. And for the first time, she was able to get off her medication after about 2 weeks. Actually, she started the experiment and got off the medication. And she's been pretty much symptom-free, doing great for now more than a month. We've been testing with labs, and we did labs at the beginning, and now we're going to continue the experiment and see what our labs will look like after being carnivore for maybe 2-3 months, and see if there is an improvement in their numbers. And by the way, when you get thyroid labs, all of you who might want to do experiments with yourselves, do not just get TSH. That will not tell you almost anything. you really do need to get a full panel. And the markers, thyroid markers, there is at least 7 markers you can check. So you want to get the TSH, you want to get free and total T3 and T4, and then reverse T3 is very important, and antibodies to TPO and thyroglobulin. So those are the markers that we really need to look at if we want to have an understanding on how your thyroid is affected and how it's affected by, for example, this experiment. I have not had the chance to do labs on myself. I have also been extremely busy, so I've had a really hard time to track all my vitals. So I'm doing this experiment kind of as a how am I feeling experiment, and how is this affecting things like my mood and, like I say, my cycle, my energy. Those are all things that we can track day by day, and I've been like tracking with posts and videos, and like also tracking my ketones. And I've been in low to moderate ketosis actually throughout the carnivore experiment. And reverting back to keto paleo yesterday, my ketosis was actually lower than it's been for the previous 2 weeks. Let's see, question. So about the hormones, going back to the hormones, I think that from my point of view as a nutritionist, you know, I had a whole presentation about thyroid hormones and supporting them with carb ups when you are adrenal fatigued, perimenopausal, and have low thyroid, and being ketogenic for a long period of time, how to improve your conversion rates and how to improve your general thyroid health with carb ups. So that is still a valid point for me, but I'm also thinking that carb ups plus increased protein, and carb ups meaning this green, what I call the green carb ups. So that means like extra veggies and cruciferous and bitter vegetables, not necessarily like carb ups with keto sweets or, you know, keto treats or other forms of carbohydrates, not necessarily fiber in the sense of like nuts and seeds. I've been finding nuts and seeds to be quite problematic. And I also want to speak about dietary restrictions, because there are 2 sides to every coin. And when we go into such an extremely restricted diet, again, there are good and bad parts of it. Actually, let's talk about it right now. You know, I think that we all need variety in our diets, but even within such a restricted diet, we can find variety if we put some effort to it. So for example, even if you're trying to eat just red meat, 4-legged animals, and greens, there is a wide variety of meats you can be eating. There is bison, there is of course grass-fed beef, there is venison. In Hungary, they use pork a lot because it's a local animal and is pork that is raised basically wild or raised, you know, pastured, and a specific heirloom variety of pork. And I'm so happy to announce this, but I will be interviewing the doctor behind PALEO Medicina in Hungary, Dr. Sophia Clemens, and she will be on my live interviews series in about a month. So I'm really excited because she's a genius creator of PALEO Medicina and also the scientist behind this clinic where they heal people with just meat. So I've been kind of studying her research a little bit, starting to investigate, study in my free time, and like really digging into the different options of why doing this carnivore diet. And they heal a number of different conditions, including hypothyroidism, with just 3 months of strict diet. And then start reintroducing foods, which also leads me to understand. And she does what she called Paleolithic keto, while I do keto paleo. So we're very aligned. And coming from like a doctor, a biochemist, a scientist, it's really reassuring for me to see that there are people that deeply understand at the biochemical ancestral level, this kind of way of eating. So Now, totally lost my topic. Great. We're going back to the questions. Sorry if I rabbit holed there, but I was really excited about this coming interview. So we were talking about hormones and carb ups. Yes. So I think that the reason, for my personal opinion, and I think that Dr. Sophia Clemens kind of agrees with that as well, but is that the reason why we will go strictly carnivore is to heal specific conditions, specific problems in our body with this OMID diet, and then be able to expand the diet again a little bit, including certain foods. Again, from an ancestral point of view, grains and dairy, they're not included in ancestral diets, so in keto paleo. I do not think that as we expand back our diet after healing, that we need to include certain things like grains. And this is, again, my opinion. I've been grain-free for more than 7-8 years right now, and I think I'm doing really well. I think I'm pretty much at optimal performance and status of health for a 49-year-old woman, perimenopausal and coming from hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. Put all those conditions in remission, and actually pretty much I am like at a perfect state of health right now, that being in perimenopause. So there's been a lot of sidetracking in this video, sorry, but I'm trying to answer everything and cram everything in here. So Ranger is asking a question. Let's try to answer this one. Can you give an example of a day of eating carnivore? Do you still have a coffee with MCT or cream? Okay, here is like my Achilles heel is the morning tea. I don't have coffee because I am personally allergic pretty much to caffeine, to coffee specifically. I can have a little bit of caffeine, but due to my liver, and I'm suspecting to have a double MTHFR mutation, I just sent in my kit, my 23andMe DNA test, and I'm really excited to finally be able to see things that I suspected for a long time. We'll see when it comes out. I'll share with you guys. But I cannot really do caffeine, and especially because my adrenals, it jacks me up, and like my adrenals are really delicate being perimenopausal, hint, Ranger. And so I try to baby them a lot. So that means I take daily adrenal support. By the way, I skipped the adrenal support through the carnivore experiment, so it's been 3 weeks without adrenal support. And if you guys saw my older videos, you know that I was taking sometimes a glandular when I'm super stressed, and sometimes I'm just taking adaptogens. Sometimes I'm taking protomorphogens from Standard Process, which is the kind of supplements I use in my practice. I skipped the adrenal support, and I did feel it a little bit. So my energy has been pretty good throughout with the carnivore experiment, but I think that for me specifically, when I get really busy and really stressed, like a lot of you out there, that it's beneficial to have some adaptogens or some protomorphogens to extra support the adrenals. Now, coffee in the morning. So I reverted back to keto paleo. One of the main reasons was that I really had a hard time without my drink in the morning. And I know that from a lot of my patients and you guys out there who are doing this kind of lifestyle, that you really like the warm drink in the morning. Good morning, June. And like we want as that little bit of comfort, and sometimes it's just that hot drink in the morning that gets your day started so that you can like kind of carburate, you know, and get going. And sometimes we wake up full of energy, sometimes we wake up a little slower. For me, it also depends on the weather a lot. And like, you know, when the weather is gray, like it's been here for like the famous June gloom in Southern California, I cannot stand it. And so I find my mornings to be slower, and I really, really need to have something hot to drink, and hot water doesn't always cut it. So yes, if you are doing strict carnivore, no drink in the morning. So that means you would just have hot water if you're going to be really strict. If you're going to be less strict, you could have something like green tea, like matcha, add water, nothing added. I think that would be like the closest you can get to have something for a drink in the morning. You could put some fat in it, but then we are coming away. I don't think anybody really would like tallow in their drink in the morning, to be really strict carnivore and have coffee with beef tallow. Even I kind of balk at it, and you guys know I'm very experimental. So the other things in my drink in the morning, I've been putting collagen, which is beef collagen, and that's okay with carnivore. And that is kind of like my breakfast. So I use ghee and collagen in my drink. And sometimes I do a little bit of matcha powder, which is great for, it's a tannic herb, great for microcirculation, and really good antioxidant profile. So it's got a lot of benefits that counterbalance that little bit of caffeine. So matcha is approved for me, and I use sometimes the matcha from Perfect Keto, especially when I travel, because it's ready to go, perfectly mixable. And so I just blend it in with some water and boom, done. And has MCT powder in it. But when I'm at home, I will use that, or sometimes I use pure grade ceremonial matcha and I add ghee and collagen to it and coconut oil. So that's my drink in the morning, my famous drink. If I don't use matcha, I use ticino sometimes. But the rest of the day, sorry, here, I tend to divagate today. Is that Italian? The rest of the day, I will have, that's my breakfast, and then I will eat meat for lunch. So the examples of what I've been eating. I've been eating some steaks, fatty steaks. I treated myself to some ribeye, but I also believe in eating nose to tail. That's a big thing for me. You know, I'm big in sustainability. So I've been kind of eating my way through the animal. And the week before I had a giant leg of lamb, and then I baked it, roasted. I don't remember how I cooked it, but I ate the whole thing. Like I made it and then sliced it cold, warmed it up, and like just kind of made like a lamb version of pulled pork with it. So like cooking one big piece of meat. I have this piece of paper in my hand. Let me put it down there. Okay. One big piece of meat is actually really helpful, because then if you're in a pinch, you can just slice off the meat and just take it with you, or eat it even cold. And I've been doing salt, by the way, with my meat and water experiment. So I think I wasn't like just quite as strict as some people go, where they don't even use salt, they just do meat and water. So that would be my lunch. I had some sausages, prepared chicken sausage. That was in the first week when I went only red meat and water. Then I bought myself the famous big giant heart that you guys saw on the, if you saw on Instagram, and I made that on Sunday. I made heart kind of like seared, that it can be kind of almost like a beef jerky. And then I made a stew that was really delicious, and I had my friend over and she ate it and couldn't believe it was heart meat. She had never eaten heart before. I really like using organ meats for the nutrient dense qualities. So I think that if you're going to be carnivore only long time, that having some organ meats will be really, really appropriate and beneficial. You can get, like I had somebody ask me about the mutation, the MTHFR mutation and vitamin B12, and how you get that if you're carnivore only. But don't forget, there is plenty of vitamin B12 in liver. Liver pretty much has, you know, a lot of minerals, trace minerals and vitamins that you get usually from vegetables. But if you're supplementing liver, heart, and guess what, brains have been the big bad guy after the whole mad cow disease thing. But I think that we're pretty in the clear with that, and especially if it's not feedlot beef, thank you, it should be grass-fed beef. And then brain would be a great addition to your high-fat carnivore diet, cow brains. And by the way, they asked me, how do you prepare brains? So you get them cleaned from your butcher if you can get them. Like you would probably already get them cleaned and peeled. If they're not peeled, you would have to boil them in lemon water for about 5 minutes until they're firm, and then I see people are leaving because I'm talking about eating brains. Sorry guys, nose to tail means brains as well. So you will boil them, peel them, and then you can like kind of fry them in some butter or in some ghee once they're pre-boiled and they stay together. I grew up on brains and they're really delicious if prepared the right way. They can be really disgusting if you don't know what to do. So okay, let me see. I think I answered all the questions for today. Oh yeah, last one was raw versus cooked. And I just want to, like, I'm not going to go into the whole science of like raw protein and how we need complete amino acids, they're necessary nutrients, and how when you eat raw protein, you get the best form of complete amino acids unadulterated. But just to say, to prove this point, is that most ancestral diets, most traditional diets around the world contain raw meat dishes. And there is a reason, and the reason is that they're health promoting. Of course, the meat has to be fresh. It has to be clean. I would never eat raw meat that comes from a beef lot, a feedlot. I don't eat feedlot meat anymore anyways. And make sure to not do that. But if you eat grass-fed beef, in Italy we have delicious carpaccio, we have steak tartare. In France there is steak tartare. Thai food, if believe it or not, larb is raw meat and is cooked in lemon. So you don't, just because it's not cooked with fire, you can still cook it with lemon or vinegar sometimes. Salt can cure your meat. Beef jerky is raw, so you know, it's not as bad as we might think. And actually, if you look on my Instagram, I ate raw beef Japanese style on Friday, and it was amazing. It was with sesame oil and salt, and I think there might have been a bit of soy sauce in that one, which I wouldn't put at home. Keto and menopausal women. Avira, this is about the carnivore experiment, so I will be talking about keto and menopausal women in a different video, but I will remember for sure and talk about that topic in a different Facebook Live. Thank you for watching. So, raw meat, yes, quality is very important, and there are different ways to prepare it. So it kind of like cooks in its own juices, like especially with lemon. In Italy, we have raw ground beef that is cooked in lemon with capers and is delicious. And by the way, if you're going to eat raw meat here, I would go to a place where you can have it, like ground beef especially. Don't just buy the ground beef on the shelf and eat it raw. I would not do that, because the bacteria sits there, and yes, the bacterial count will raise exponentially with time. So go to the butcher and pick a piece of meat, like filet mignon is really good to eat raw, or whatever piece of meat you want, and have them grind it for you on the spot. Go home, prepare it, eat it right away. Don't let it sit on the shelf. And the same like I would also do for carpaccio, unless I eat sometimes from my frozen, because I would get my meat from the farmer and then take it home already frozen. And then I will defrost it just enough, slice it very thin, and eat it as a carpaccio. And I never had any problems with that. Oh yes, last thing. This is really the last one. Blood type. I definitely think that some blood types are more adapted, evolutionarily adapted for carnivore, especially the O blood types. I'm an O negative blood type, so I know that I do really well with protein, as I mentioned before. And like, I definitely, I did my ketogenic diet with high protein and especially red meat. If I don't eat red meat, I feel the difference. I really need red meat to ground me and to give me energy. This is what my body likes. So I think that yes, there is something to blood type and also to DNA. And there is a whole lot of research out there. I, don't always have time to dig as deep as I would like into all the different facets of research and experiments, but I try to keep up with it as much as I can. So this was an experiment done on myself. I will continue eating now my modified 80-20 for this week. Before I start traveling, I'm going to be traveling for most of July and August. So you guys will follow my adventures in eating keto paleo as I go. And I'm going back to Europe after 3 years. I'm going back to Italy to see my parents and spend some time in my home country. It's been a long time. And yeah, I will continue doing the Facebook Live videos so that you guys can see how to navigate the world on keto paleo, high protein, what there is in Italy of all places to eat. And it's not just carbs and pizza and pasta like you think. So we'll keep you posted. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please continue asking questions below. Even after I post it, I will chime in and reply to your questions. So thank you so much for watching. And follow the Nourished Caveman on Instagram. I've been posting all my food there. So just pop over to Instagram and look at what I've been eating day by day to get recipes, ideas. I have not been creating a ton of recipes these days as I'm eating very simple. Thank you, Vara. But you know, you can get food ideas, and there are tons of recipes on my blog. I have a cookbook with 80 recipes of keto paleo. That's like the truest to my heart. In my cookbook, I put all my favorite things that I would eat when I have, like, you know, my ideal way of eating. So check out the Keto Paleo Kitchen, the blog The Nourished Caveman if you want recipes, and if you want ideas on how to eat keto carnivore, pop over on Instagram, and the posts do get shared here on Facebook as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Tuesday again for another Facebook Live. Have a wonderful week.